Hello, Gaba, or anyone who is listening to this video. This is made to give a small tour or overview of the architecture that we have created for this project together and to justify the ideas and methods that we ought to employ to make this work possible. At the core of our work is the process and how we work naturally, and the ideas naturally came about from a collective effort of everyone in the team. Rather than employing a singular idea and working on it, we started by looking at different ideas which everyone have and trying to find a connection. But after a lot of conversation and contemplation on each other works, worldview, and language, we try to find a pattern and overarching philosophical ideas that everyone or most of us believed in some way or had a contradiction about. That was the idea of being surveilled or having a control over our social situations and structures. Therefore, we came upon the idea of Panopticon, first proposed by the philosopher Michael Foucault. And we are trying to create a cohesive space or an architecture that act as a representation of the society created in the form of this panopticon, and where individual ideas or philosophies create a space and in which it is of a surveilled space, and we are trying to put up a question as to what is it surveyed and who is surveilling. So, here are the ideas and the mind map which you are familiar with, and this is another representation of the idea of the panopticon, which has been used by the uh, Indian jail system in Andaman and Nicobar to create a structure of surveillance for a jail itself. So we are not using the exact idea, but the structure follows a similar pattern. Therefore, we are using the shape of a hexagonal maze and creating a society in it. There are three kind of spaces in this: the inner space, the middle or the walking space, and the outer space. Each and every space which is created in this work has its own cohesive meaning and plays a purpose in the overall theme of the work. So let me go to the model right now. So this is a 3D rendering of the kind of work which we want to do. Uh, and this is the top view of the work. So the starting or the first layer, which is the outer layer of the entire work, is the mind map itself. We are trying to employ different kind of ways in which we can represent the mind map that we have created, but not literally by making the mind map, but adding the ideas that we found connections in, and then putting it together into a form of mind map and creating a wall that invites the viewer in through the connections that we built in the mind map itself. For example, we can see there are different layers in this, and each and every image which is there, for example, this idea of the surveillance of the criminal justice system and this X-ray system, which is contributed by members of our team and then created into a cohesive image that both agrees upon and find a connection in. Layers of the work is also providing a walkthrough of the entire space. The viewer enters from this space and goes throughout the map in a way that he has to follow a singular path that is being granted to it by the structure itself. This also creates a power system that the structure itself is governing the path that the viewer has to follow. This this idea of a structure that has a power game in it, and uh, says the viewer that you have to move in a particular way, is representing the kind of society that we want to show, critique, or have a conversation with. If we enter through this space, we see various work that are being kept side by side. And the most important thing about why we kept these things like this, or why we are creating this space, is the connection that is being formed between them more than the work itself. So let me start with one part of the work. So there are different spaces which we are talking about, which are sometimes very intimate, sometimes very public, and sometimes part of the pop culture. And the connection that is built, or the contradictions that are there in the intimate space and the larger pop cultural space, is a very interesting one that we are trying to judge here. So if we see at this very end part of the uh, maze, where there is this very intimate space which is proposed by Priyanka. So she's trying to create a space of a toilet which is being used by the people or the female of their community. She tries to invoke um, various kind of emotions about the vulnerability of those women, and also trying to show how they are trying to find the best of, trying to create the best of the situation they are getting, and creating a space for themselves. But this space also has a contradiction in it, that it is a space that can be predatored by many different people. It can be a predatorial space, or a space of vulnerability which can be exploited by many people. So therefore, this starts to create a conversation. This work, which is kept beside this work, very intimate of Priyanka, is the work where Aishwarya tries to create a conflict by adding this very significant image of the breastfeeding scene uh, performed by Mandakini in one of a very popular Bollywood movie, and how her personal space was invaded by a person, and the kind of misogyny, and also the kind of hierarchical structure this represents, and how the private spaces of many people are violated by this. So this putting this work beside the kind of work that Priyanka does creates this conversation, which is very much valid for the kind of structure we want to create. Inside the structure, though, the vision of the gaze is questioned again. There is this person from a Satyajit Ray movie looking at a female, and we have placed this in a space uh, very near to this, and this uh, provokes the question of the gaze. And similarly, when I place the very strong female characters which these films often show, and how they are using and or challenging the gaze by changing the gaze from the female to the male, and looking at them while looking at those bodies, is also creating a conversation throughout this work itself. Moving forward, we go on to the pop cultural references from this kind of Bollywood movies, and the idea of the ideal woman, of the ideal man, or the ideal body. This is very much represented in the Bollywood or the pop cultural scene, and which is here put forward, but also being questioned by Swati's work, where she is questioning the idea of the uh, of the faces, and how is it a particular notion that is creating this ideal of the perfect face or the perfect body. She is working in a very personal manner, but still questioning this idea of the ideal body or the ideal face. So when we put this uh, figure created by Sauti, which is creating such a question beside this work or in front of this work, it is questioning the very idea of the idealization or the setting standards for the female and the male body that we see throughout. Coming from this ideal, we come to the ideal of the family, which is represented and working on by Sarmishtha. She tries to create a small structure like a house, and where she is trying to find objects like this TV or other objects, which is like a glue or a magnet that brings the family together and forms this idea of a joint family. These objects are not just objects of nostalgia, but also objects that represent the idea of the joint family itself. And this collage of images, which is placed in front of this work, is like a mirror of how the joint family comes up and forms a circle around a particular object in a house. Also, employing images from films like Bagban, we are creating a kind of situation where we are trying to create pop culture and linking it with the ideals of the family. The idea of the site is also very important in our work. And when we enter the central space, we mostly work with the idea of the site which we are going to and which we are being. Throughout our works, we are trying to philosophically look at the site and see how it is contradicting itself and how it is also relating to one another. So the central space is perhaps the most important part, which brings all these works together in form of a video projection, which will happen and it will join all these works together. There are constant surveillance cameras which are placed throughout the work and facing the viewer itself. So when the viewer enters the work or viewer enters this space, it is creating this space of surveillance, like the jail where every prisoner is being surveilled throughout. But when the viewer enters this space after looking at those works, is becoming from the surveilled to the person who is surveilling. And this is changing the role of the viewer. And it is also questioning the viewer that is this ethical or not. We are not trying to directly give ethical or moral positions to this kind of questions, but mostly posing the questions itself. And that is a more strong way to create this argument, we believe. There are other works which relate and contrast with each other and create a cohesive image of the practices or the tapestry or collage of practices we are trying to create. We begin the mix with this very intimate idea of the plant growing, which comes from Ritika's practice of looking at a singular plant, how it is growing. She forms this structure of a very intimate step of how a plant grows from a small bud to a entire plant, and she also wants to keep a real plant which will grow throughout the process of the entire exhibition and give a relevance to this idea of the growth and have a changing theme of growth in the work itself. Membi also tends to place her work beside this, and her is connecting to this philosophical idea of her intimate space and trying to explored the idea of the temporarity of this space. She wants to create a space using cyanotype and water, and dissolving cyanotype in water, and also keeping it for this entire duration of the 3 months, and how the cyanotype fades away with time and create this idea of temporary space in the work itself. As the viewer moves from this intimate space, he is brought to this very violent work which is proposed by Rajat. And this work is a data collection work of the pollution of the site itself, of the Kochi site itself. Everyone is somehow connecting to the Kochi site through material or through concept itself. Like Membi tends to use or wants to use the water from Kochi itself and see how that water itself will remove or find a temporary relation with the cyanotypes. But right now, Rajat is doing a very cohesive uh, research on the pollution that is caused in the Kochi area itself and the beside area itself. He's not just trying to accumulate data on pollution, but is trying to artistically interpret what he forms from that and how is that even relevant in the current context. So he proposed this idea of a cut tree, or tree, not just any tree, but the national tree or the things of that place, that is the palm tree. And he wants to project the data of the pollution using plastic or other stuff which he collects from the space itself in the form of the tree. And this idea of the fire, which is again coming from Bollywood and pop culture, adds to the drama of the scene itself, not just arbitrarily, but also forms this space of violence which is being seen throughout because of this pollution. Ranjan's adds a very cohesive and detailed idea of his this fish net which he is researching on, and he's connecting from his Sundarban identity and with the Kochi itself. A fish net is also connecting his ideas and also showing the connection itself. This net is like connecting all the ideas which we see throughout. Ultimately, our main goal with this project is to see or judge the idea of connection itself. Our Each of our ideas or works are not isolated. They are trying to build upon each other and trying to form a connection that forms a society which is being surveilled upon 24/7. And the central space is a culmination of all those compilation, and is creating a very direct connection. Here I take name of each and everyone who is working in this practice individually, because individual practices uh, govern the spaces and the things which are created here. But I will like to mention that more than the individual, the work is about the connection itself. For example, if we see this Max Muller Bhavan work created by Sanchanda, we can see that he's trying to build a connection between various kind of practices which has been there throughout art history and throughout the observations he has made on it, and trying to connect it by creating an architecture and with different materials that we have formed. We are basically using a very similar kind of uh, idea where we are trying to look at different kind of practices, different languages, and then trying to find a connection in between them and create an entire different language out of it. Our language is not that of a singularity, but of the multiplicity of the ideas that we see. Therefore, this is how the model looks right now. We have proposed a lot of technical materials which would be ideal for our project, but is not completely necessary. If required, we can also decrease the amount of projectors or the screens which we might need for this work, so that we can cohesively do this work. Of course, the perfect amount of projectors and screens we have mentioned would be able to give this work a very cohesive and detailed approach. But if it is not possible, we are there to change or change the arrangements of some stuff, or create a bit different kind of projection thing which we have thought initially, but uh, that we think we should discuss and find out what we can do. And therefore, this is the entire uh, structure. One last thing which I will want to say, that the viewer enters where we want him to enter. He sees the entire work. He thinks he has free will, and then he see himself being surveilled in the center. This is reflecting the way we see ourselves in the society. We believe we have free will. We follow a path. We follow a path which is predefined for us. And then we see that we have never made those choices, and we're always being surveilled throughout our process, throughout our life. This uh, despite of having so many different ideas and so many different philosophical ideals, this is something which we all agreed upon, and therefore finds a cohesive connection in, and we made this idea of the Panopticon based on these ideals. So thank you for considering it.